Advisors urged Tony Blair to rein in George W. Bush over Iraq War. Mission from God. A senior U.S. official said the president needed a dose of reality to deal with Iraqi insurgents. Documents reveal Tony Blair's advisors privately questioned if the U.S. had proper political control of military operations in Iraq after a senior U.S. official confided that George W. Bush believed he was on a mission from God against Iraqi insurgents. Newly released documents reveal Blair needed to deliver some difficult messages to the then U.S. president for a more measured approach in April 2004, following a U.S. military operation to suppress a major uprising in the city of Fallujah. According to papers released to the National Archives in Q. West London.in, a surprisingly candid conversation, recorded in a document marked, "Please protect very carefully." Richard Rich Armitage, then U.S. Deputy Secretary of State, told Sir David Manning, then UK ambassador, that Bush had needed a dose of reality after demanding U.S. forces kick ass in Fallujah, where U.S. troops were engaged in a bloody battle with Iraqi militants after 4 private military contractors were ambushed and killed. Armitage appealed to Blair to use his influence in a forthcoming visit to Washington on April 16 to urge Bush to deal with Fallujah as part of a carefully judged political process. The U.S. had launched Operation Vigilant Resolve in Fallujah after the mutilated bodies of the U.S. contractors were hung from a bridge over the Euphrates River less than 1 year after the May 2003 overthrow of the Iraqi dictator Saddam Hussein. Bush had initially been influenced by his military generals and wanted to kick ass, with U.S. Marines occupying the city. But politicians on the Coalition Provisional Authority, set up after Saddam's fall, feared the U.S. military response could damage hopes of establishing an independent Iraqi administration. Bush backed off after being faced with this dose of reality, Manning reported back to Number 10. Rich summed it all up by saying Bush still thought he was on some sort of mission from God, but that recent events had made him rather more sober. Bush had famously declared mission accomplished after the overthrow of Hussein by U.S. and UK coalition forces. But the White House has previously dismissed as absurd reports that Bush privately told a Palestinian delegation in 2003 that God spoke to him and said, "George, go fight these terrorists in Afghanistan," and "George, go and end the tyranny in Iraq." Armitage dismissed claims by the overall U.S. commander in Iraq, Gen. John Abizaid, that he could put down the Fallujah uprising within days as bullshit and politically crass. Armitage believed the U.S. was gradually losing on the battlefield and that it was inevitable the administration would have to send more troops, which would be politically ugly for Bush. Manning reported that NO10 was nervous about the U.S. military response. A briefing document, ahead of Blair's Washington visit in April 2004, said events in Fallujah had used up a great deal of the coalition's political capital. Publicly, we will want to underline our continued commitment to seeing the task through. But privately, we will need to deliver some difficult messages to Bush about the need for a more measured approach by the U.S. military, under proper political oversight, and the need for a clear end to the occupation on July 1st, it said. It added, the Prime Minister might question Bush on whether there is proper political control of military operations, and concluded, in short, too many military officers talking tough to a U.S. audience, with little attention to the effect on an Iraqi or regional audience. Blair's foreign policy advisor, Sir Nigel Sheinwald, described the UK's main concerns in a memo to the Prime Minister as clumsy U.S. handling, disproportionate U.S. military tactics. What they did in Fallujah looked on Iraqi TV screens to be a form of collective punishment and apocalyptic media treatment. The U.S. lost 27 troops, while about 200 insurgents and 600 Iraqi civilians were thought to have been killed in Fallujah at that time. Coalition forces took the city in a second offensive launched in November 2004. U.S. troops remained in Iraq until 2011. Olaf Scholz, German election will not be decided by social media owners. Chancellor's New Year's Eve address follows Elon Musk's endorsement of German far-right party AfD. On X, the German Chancellor, Olaf Scholz, has urged voters not to let the owners of social media channels decide next year's snap election, after Elon Musk repeatedly endorsed the far-right party Alternative for Deutschland AfD. In a New Year's Eve address recorded for television and made available before its broadcast on Tuesday, Scholz said German citizens alone had the power to decide where Germany goes from here after the general election on February 23rd. It will not be decided by the owners of social media channels, Scholz said of the country's future. In our debates, one can be forgiven for sometimes thinking the more extreme an opinion is, the more attention it will garner. Rather, Scholz said, the fate of German society will be up to the vast majority of reasonable and decent people. Without mentioning Musk or his platform, X, explicitly, Scholz urged Germans to resist manipulation and to stand up for their democracy. After all, it's customary to make wishes on New Year's Eve. What I wish for is that we will not let ourselves be played off each other, he said. Scholz noted there had been a surge of disinformation on social media after the Christmas market attack in Magdeburg on December 20th, in which 5 people were killed and more than 200 injured. The car ramming was allegedly committed by a Saudi-born assailant with far-right sympathies. No small number of these rumors and conjectures, though, have meanwhile been debunked. These things divide and weaken us, he said. This is not good for our country. On Monday, a spokesperson for Scholz, Christian Hoffmann, accused Musk of trying to meddle in the country's election campaign with a series of declarations backing the anti-Muslim, anti-migration AfD party. It is indeed the case that Elon Musk is trying to influence the federal election, Hoffmann said at a regular media briefing. Musk had the right to free speech, she said, adding, after all, freedom of opinion also covers the greatest nonsense. Musk has often weighed in on German politics, even calling Scholz a fool on X last month. However, his more recent open calls for German voters to support the AfD, which federal authorities classify as a suspected extremist party, have sparked outrage and accusations of troubling interference in Europe's top economy. The South African-born entrepreneur, a close advisor to Donald Trump, who has been named by the incoming president to co-lead a commission aimed at reducing the size of the U.S. federal government, wrote on X earlier this month, "Only the AfD can save Germany." In the post, Musk shared a video by a German right-wing influencer, Naomi Seipt, who criticized Friedrich Merz, the conservative frontrunner in the German election, and praised Javier Milei, Argentina's self-styled anarcho-capitalist president. He followed up at the weekend with a guest editorial in the broadsheet Welt am Sonntag arguing that Germany was teetering on the brink of economic and cultural collapse, defending the AfD against accusations of radicalism and praising the party's approach to the economy, including regulation and tax policy. The editor of the center-right newspaper's opinion section, Eva Marie Kogel, posted on X that she had submitted her resignation in protest at the decision to run the article. Politicians from across the political spectrum criticized Musk's attempts to put his thumb on the scales of German democracy, with the health minister Karl Lauterbach of Scholz's Social Democratic Party, SPD, calling his intervention undignified and highly problematic, and Merz saying it was intrusive and presumptuous. Merz told the Funk Media Group, "I cannot recall in the history of Western democracies a comparable case of interference in the election campaign of a friendly country." Scholz's center-left-led coalition collapsed last month, prompting him to call a confidence vote in order to trigger a general election in February, 7 months ahead of schedule. His SPD is widely expected to lose to Merz's CDU/CSU bloc amid voter anger over the cost of living and meager economic growth. AfD members have been working for months to make inroads with the Trump camp, seeking to harness his electoral momentum for the German campaign. Alice Weidel, the party's co-leader, was one of the first foreign politicians to welcome Trump's victory. A small group of AfD activists posed for pictures with Trump at his private club Mar-a-Lago on U.S. Election Day last month, chanting "Fight! Fight! Fight" in English and German. Musk's endorsement in Die Welt cited Weidel's same-sex partner from Sri Lanka as evidence that the portrayal of the AfD as right-wing extremist is clearly false. "Does that sound like Hitler to you? Please," he wrote. The AfD is polling second on about 19%, behind the CDU/CSU on 31%. A strong showing for the party could complicate coalition building, requiring the election winner to seek up to 2 partners to build a ruling majority. All mainstream parties have ruled out collaborating with the AfD at state or federal level,